who's going to be the next mayor of Mississauga. This is going to be an awesome episode on Tea with Lee, and we're going to get in focus with mayoral candidate Alvin Tedjo.
Hey, everyone.
Okay, Alvin, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Lee. I'm really excited.
I am too. I mean, you're running as the mayoral candidate for Mississauga. You're currently the councilor for Lorne Park and Clarkson, and you've done a lot in this short time. But really what I want to get to at the heart of this right now is what needs fixing in Mississauga?
Well, thanks, Lee. First of all, Mississauga is a great place. It's a great place to raise a family. It's a great place to start a business, to get an education. And that's why my parents moved there. They moved there when I was 4 years old. So I didn't have any say about moving to Mississauga, but my parents, who were immigrants from, halfway around the world, saw a lot of opportunity in this city. And one of the biggest things was that they could afford a home. Right? So they did start a business, they did get an education, they did become part of the community, but most of all, they were able to buy a house. And with that, they started a family. And they started a family with me and my siblings, and we've continued to live in Mississauga ever since. And when my wife, Rebecca, and I were looking for places to raise our family, we've got 3 kids now, we chose Mississauga as well, because we knew how great it was as a community for families to raise their children. But that's a huge problem right now, because that's not possible for the future or current generation that's out there. I can't imagine my kids, who are 9, 11, and 13, being able to afford a place in Mississauga. So they can't get what I got, which was being able to, live in the community that they grew up in. The average person in Mississauga right now makes about $54,000 a year. The average rent for a 1-bedroom apartment is $2,200.
Yeah.
So you do the math. And that means they're spending 2/3 of their salary only on housing, right? Only on rent or a mortgage. And that leaves them $1,000, $1,000 for food, for transportation, for clothing, anything, right? And that's not sustainable. No one is able to move into the city because of that, right? So that's the biggest problem we're facing right now. And one of the other challenges, because Mississauga has been so unaffordable to live in, and we're not building enough housing, we've actually seen the population stagnate for the last 10 years. The last 2 censuses have shown that, the population hasn't really grown in any real way, even though we have been building some more housing. But what we're doing is we're not building enough, right? And you've got a number of communities, especially in my neighborhoods that I represent, who've become sort of empty nest homes, right? Where the kids have moved out because they can't afford to live anywhere else in the city. And then we're building and replacing them with just 1-bedroom apartments. So we need to build all kinds of new housing, right? We need all sorts of housing options across the city, from market housing to purpose-built rental to affordable housing, subsidized, all of it, because we're not meeting the needs for the people who are here right now and for the future generations.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, as a realtor, obviously housing is very important to me. And I have lots of clients who are looking to move out to Mississauga because they see it as, adjacent to Toronto. They can hop on the go, get downtown pretty quickly and have more space to live in, right? Or a bit more affordable. I was following what happened with the vote on fourplexes, and it was a bit divisive, wasn't it?
Yeah, so the vote actually failed. I introduced the motion to expand housing options, what we call missing middle housing, or gentle density housing in the city of Mississauga. And I was honestly surprised. The reason the vote failed, it was because it was a tie. So we had a tie in council, and you need a majority, obviously, to pass something. And it failed because there were councillors who, were worried about how this would affect the makeup of current and existing communities, and that it wasn't going to, blend well. And I, this was obviously troubling, because I was surprised that we didn't jump on it, and that even though we've had a missing middle housing policy for quite a few years as the city of Mississauga, that they didn't see this as the next evolution of that, right? And the way that you design a fourplex policy can be very much in line with the character of the neighborhood that people like to talk about. You can make it fit within the existing envelope of the zoning that is already allocated to those spaces. And in fact, that's what we're doing right now. We were able to get it passed eventually because when Bonnie Crombie, who was our mayor, came back from her leave of absence after winning the leadership, she brought it back using her strong mayor powers, and then we finally got it passed. So I'm glad we were able to do that. I've been working with the federal government and the Minister of Housing, Sean Fraser, around the different things that we needed to do in order to meet the challenge that the federal government has laid out. And they said, we need more transit. We need more housing along transit lines. We need to intensify along major transit station areas, right? That's where it makes sense for transit-oriented development. At the same time, while you're intensifying in those particular corridors and around stations, you also need to fill in the middle everywhere else, right? So you can get, 5, 10, 15% of your housing stock that you need through that missing middle strategy if you are allowing things like fourplexes, threeplexes, garden suites, backyard units, laneways. And the city kind of has a 2 steps forward, 1 step back policy with some of these things, right? Because the devil's always in the details. When you look at examples around the world or just in North America of where they've implemented fourplexes or multiplexes, what you see is that while as of right, you can do it, if the city wants to, and often does, they can make it very difficult for that to actually happen. So the city of Victoria legalized fourplexes quite a few years ago. And in the first year, they only built 3. And the state of California, which is basically the same size as Canada, 40 million people, they legalized fourplexes across the entire state. And across the entire state, they built 56 in the first year.
Okay.
So the reason they only built so few is because you have councils and particular councilors who come in and change the regulations around setbacks and angular planes and height restrictions to the point where it makes it so many hoops that you can't actually get the project done, right? There's one example where after we passed fourplexes and garden suites, another councillor who happens to be running against me in the mayoral election changed the setback for existing dwellings that were in the backyard, right? So I have a resident who has an 800 square foot garage in the back that they don't use, and they want to convert it to a little apartment that somebody could rent. And obviously it met the existing setbacks of 1 meter, 3 feet. And the new regulation that we put in doubled it. So, staff had to tell them, well, you got to move it. And they're like, the building already exists. Why would I move it? I just want to renovate the inside and put some plumbing and things like that. And like, well, that's the regulation. If you want to change it, you got to go to the committee of adjustment. It's like, well, how long does that take? Well, it's going to take a few months and you're going to pay a few $1,000s and you're going to get some drawings and blah, blah, blah. So all we're doing is creating new barriers. So I think it's really important that we have leadership at the city that reflects the urgent need for more housing and to talk about it at every step of the way and to help change the culture of really being supportive of gentle intensification and missing middle housing and helps us, change the regulations appropriately so that we can actually get the building and not just have the, shiny thing in the front window that says we've legalized it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is case in point. I have so many clients who, they want to update or renovate or increase living capacity, but it's getting permits. It's getting through the paperwork. And so I actually think the role of counselors, the role of leadership is really important because if you can say, oh, well, we just made it more complicated for you to do it of what before was perfectly acceptable. And so I think that how can we make things more efficient? How can we make government more efficient so people can do what they need to do and just, I don't want to wait for 6 months. Like I can do it now.
Yeah. So one of the things I've asked staff to do, and we're putting forward as part of our platform, after we've done a lot of consultation with, homeowners, with builders, with, people from Housing Now, Toronto, and More Homes, Mississauga, to sort of say, what are some of the pain points that you've seen? Certainly there's things that other orders in government can do, but what are we responsible for that we can change right now, right? How do we flip the script and make this easier? So what we're saying is we need a concierge service. We need a service that says, okay, you want to build? Great, I want to help you. This is going to be the steps that you have to do, as opposed to making you jump through the hoops, right? We're going to lay it out for you and we're going to help you go through the process. I'm going to do this process with you as a city employee to help you get this building built so that we can actually get it done. right? We're nowhere near hitting our housing target, right? We only hit 39% of our housing target in the last year.
Well, I think that sounds so efficient. It sounds so reasonable, but you know.
But it's not what cities are used to, right?
Yeah.
And I love our staff. Our staff are really great. We do have excellent staff, but they were, brought on in a different environment where, we're the gatekeepers,
Yeah.
and we're the regulator, right? And we need you to meet us, right? We need to flip that and sort of say, we're in a housing crisis. We need to change the script on that.
Yeah.
We need to be the one saying, we want you to build housing. Come to us. We'll help you get there, right? And so how can we accelerate more building of necessary housing that we need, right? We want to prioritize affordability. We want to prioritize purpose-built rental. There's lots that the city can do to make that easier, right? We can have in-house planners who are focused just on that and help navigating through the process. We can delegate more authority to staff to make it go faster. We can get more of these applications in a different sort of pipeline. We need the province to meet us on the same timelines that they've asked us to do, right? There've been a number of plans that we haven't been able to approve because, Metrolinx doesn't meet the same timelines that the province has asked the city to meet. So then we have incomplete information. So we all need to come together to make this more efficient.
No, and I appreciate it because I think one of the things that you bring to the table is you're a representative of your councilor, so you know what's happening on the ground. You live in the community, but also preceding that, you've had experience working with the government.
Yeah, I spent a number of years working in the Ontario government, and I understand a lot of how the system works there and how to get things done. And then after that, I worked at other post-secondary institutions like Toronto Metropolitan University and Sheridan College, where I was working to really find a way as their government relations person and community relations person to, bring people together on these plans. And it doesn't matter what political stripe they were, everyone's intention is to get what's best for their community, right? And that's what I was able to do on a number of fronts and getting a lot of projects approved and moving forward. And, to anyone in the government that's listening, we're trying to do that. I'm going to do that. I want to work with every order of government out there to address the two biggest issues that we have, and that's the affordability crisis and the housing crisis.
Yeah. No, and I hear that. I mean, one of the things I just wanted to acknowledge is in your tenure as city councilor, and I think it's only been a year and a half, you've actually achieved some kind of cool things. Transit's a big thing. Do you want to talk a little bit about your advocacy for transportation for, some of our youngest and oldest populations?
Absolutely. I'm really proud of what we've been able to do in a short period of time. And this is all encompassing in terms of how we build complete communities, right? It's not just about building housing. It's not just about making sure life is affordable in the city, but what else is there to do? How do people get around, right? And I've been really aggressive in trying to improve our transit system in Mississauga. How do we get better service? How do we get more lines? How do we get more buses? But also, how do we support the users who are here right now? And how do we help them with affordability? When my kids and I want to go to, the ROM in Toronto, because we don't have enough museums. I want to get more museums in the city of Mississauga. But say we want to go say we want to go to the ROM, if we were doing it under the old way, we would get on the bus, we would tap our Presta card. Every member of my family would pay, and that's fine. We're willing to pay. But then we would go to the GO train, and then my kids would be free, and they would ride the GO train for free. And then we would transfer at Union and take the TTC, and my kids would still be free. So the only time my kids have to pay was at the city of Mississauga, and they were paying their full child fare, right? So I didn't think that made sense. So I had a motion in almost immediately after I got elected to make transit free for kids, right? Kids 12 and under. So on top of it being more affordable for families, we also unified the fare system for that experience to get from one point to another within the GTA. And now that the province has come up with the one fare program, that makes even more sense. So that's a great thing for them to have done. We also looked at seniors, and we said, how can we make life more affordable for seniors who may not be able to drive anymore as they age in place? So we made it $1 across all times. It used to be only for certain times on certain days. Now it's all the time, every day.
It's complicated to remember. What day is it?
Yeah, exactly. What time is it? Is it time where I can get $1 transit, or do I have to pay full fares? And then other things I'm really proud to have worked on already have been along families and along sort of the future of the city. So we had a Vision Zero plan of net zero emissions. But we didn't have a date. We didn't have a target. So it was kind of at any point we want to get to net zero.
Right.
So I said, okay, well, let's have a motion out there. I worked on it with Future Majority, which is a nice, excellent youth advocacy group, to have us meet the same targets that the federal and provincial government have by 2050. I worked with the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative and had a motion to lobby the federal government for additional supports for Lake Ontario so that we could protect Lake Ontario, the shoreline, the quality of water, and we got $420 million from the feds because of that. Again, I put in the four-plexus motion. That got us $113 million from the federal government and their housing initiative. Without my motion, the minister said we would not give you this money. So we were able to get that. Some of the fun things that I've been able to put in was around street hockey and basketball. It's legal now in Toronto. It's not legal in Mississauga. So I got a motion passed to say street hockey should be legal in Mississauga, right? And on neighborhood streets. I'm not talking about here Ontario and Lakeshore.
Yeah.
And we want kids to play outside, right? We also have a huge housing and homeless crisis in our shelter system. We're at 400% capacity, Lee, in terms of our shelter system because Pearson's entirely within Mississauga. And so some of those refugees or asylum seekers are coming off and then they're staying in Mississauga, right? Yeah. A lot of them come to Toronto, but we have a third to a quarter of the same number of those folks needing space in Mississauga. And so I, with another councillor, put in a motion to look at modular housing and find more funding supports. And so we built a new shelter in my neighborhood, just 5 minutes from my house. And we were able to do within
wasn't a part, did you have pushback? Like, what was that like? Because that's something that I've heard of and experienced in Toronto.
Yeah. So yes, that we do have a challenge with, certain communities wanting to keep the community the same. And I think that's the interesting conversation we have about municipalities is that cities never stay the same.
Yeah.
Right? Cities are always evolving.
Yeah.
And we need to stay up with the evolution and we need to be planning for it. And keeping an eye to the future. It's easy to sort of say this is someone else's problem and point the finger at the federal government for letting in too many people or to the provincial government for not funding post-secondary education so the international students are here. At the end of the day, we have the problem and we have some of the solutions.
Yeah.
So I don't want to just blame other people. I want to say, what can we do right now? So we have encampments in our neighborhoods. We have shelters that we're opening in the neighborhoods. We're the ones that can fix it. We're absolutely going to go to the other orders in government and say, hey, listen, we've had to do this. Please help us with it, right? Whether it's, grants or funding or trying to address the root causes of the problem. But at the end of the day, if we don't house them, they're on the street. And some of them have died. And it's been tragic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, this is the thing where there's so many people who are skeptical, like, oh, there's so many things that's wrong. And it's not that there's good leadership who's trying to address it. Things take time, but the reality is there's an evolution in what those needs and the demands are. And so having people who are aware of what's happening in the community or what the needs are, and it's like a modernized way of addressing things. Like we can't do things the way that things used to be done 80 years ago or something like that, right? So as I speak with so many people, I can sense and feel the frustration that folks have. And so it's like, well, why should I vote? Why does it matter? Does it matter who I'm voting for? Do we want the same? So I think they're real questions, but it's like, how can we encourage people to get involved? It's just something that you said that made me think about. It's true. Problems evolve, communities evolve, and we just need to have think outside of the box or look at solutions that might not have been a reasonable, outlet.
Yeah. To your point, I think we need new thinking for new problems, right? And the old way of thinking on how to solve some of these issues don't apply anymore, right? We live in an incredibly diverse community. Yeah. We're one of the most diverse communities in the country. right? Where over 60% of people who live in Mississauga are visible minorities.
Yeah.
And a lot of them grew up here. A lot of them have immigrated here over the last several years. And that's a great thing, right?
Yeah.
You know, we talk about how diversity is our strength. We talk about how these communities are able to interact and to thrive together, right? And so I think you need to reflect that. You need to be sensitive to the issues that they have. You can't ignore, you know, what's happening around the world and how that affects them. But what can we do as a community to help them? How do we make sure that everybody feels safe? How do we make sure that this feels like your home, right? And that we're going to be the ones out there looking out for you.
No, absolutely. And I appreciate that. And just to the point that you're talking about how Mississauga is what, 60%?
Yeah, over 60%.
Over 60%. Yeah. I mean, we just take a moment to acknowledge that when you became councilor, you were the first East Asian councilor in any rank of government in Mississauga.
Yeah.
Like, how does that happen? You know, I mean, we do know there's systemic challenges. There's, you know, people who immigrate are often focused on survival, and it is a privilege. I mean, there's a cost to running, and maybe we can talk a little bit about what it takes to stand up. Like, we're living in a very, you know, I feel for people who are representing the public, there's a lot more at stake. There's a lot of personal attacks and the family time, personal time. There is none of those things.
No, it's difficult. And, you know, credit to anyone who ever puts their name on a ballot and puts themselves out there, because I think you think it's going to happen and you know that there are going to be challenges, but I don't think anyone's fully prepared for how much time it takes, the sacrifice that you and your family make to get there. And the attacks become more and more personal. And they've been getting more and more personal. I mean, one of the first elections I ran in, and someone at the door said, you know, "You're probably the wrong color to be running in this neighborhood, don't you think?" And I was like, "I don't think so, but clearly you do. So, you know, thank you for your time. I'll see you later." Yeah. Right? Otherwise, I'm going to say something I'm going to regret. That, you know, you get frustrated and angry about that because you think, this is my community. I grew up here. I was born here. Yeah. Right? I've done so much. I think I've done a lot to make this community a better place. Right. But if you can't see past my skin color, then I feel sorry for you. Right.
It's a reality, though.
It is a reality. But then I look at my kids, right? Yeah. My kids are mixed, and they know, you know, what I've brought to the community and what I represent. They talk about it. They've talked about it in school, and you know, I think they're proud of me for that. And it's been a journey that we've done together. Before I decided to run for mayor, we sat down, you know, at our dinner table, and we said, "What do you guys think? Do you think I should do this?" And so they were enthusiastic, right? They were like, "Yeah, absolutely. We'd love you to be mayor. We think, you know, you could bring a lot to it." But also because my kids are so young, they have this sense of, you know, thinking towards the future. You're always thinking about the future when you have kids, right? Absolutely. And so I'm always thinking about how can we make this place better for them, right? Yeah. How do we give them more opportunities? Yeah. And if we don't step up, people like us don't step up, if other people who are underrepresented don't step up, or even now, not just underrepresented because they're minorities, we're actually a majority, and just aren't reflected in you know, political representation anymore, well, then who is, right? I generally think people run in politics for the right reasons. They want to make change. They want to make things better. And you are who you are, so you got to represent that. Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And I do agree very much with that. Like, our lived experience makes a big difference and informs us. Like, I mean, a part of me is just kind of thinking about the fact that one of the first things you did as councilor was to think about an affordable means of allowing people independence by traveling on, you know, public transportation, and not just kids of the future, but also taking care of our elders and seniors who want to age in place, and people are on a pension. It's a very different story, right? And limited income. Yeah. And I think about, as a person who is Chinese, where, you know, looking after your elders is really important. And as we have an aging population that is about to kind of dominate, we do need to think about that also from a healthcare perspective and community care. So I think, you know, I think Canadians in general have a sense of duty and care for each other. And it's just how we see this play out in the public spectrum and policy. So there's a couple of things on the public policy side that we can do to support that, right? How do we encourage and help develop more multi-generational homes?
Yeah.
Right. What are the bylaws that we have in place that make that more difficult with either basement apartments or secondary suites or even driveway widths? On-street parking, that's all of a challenge to help with multi-generational homes. So let's change that. Let's find a way to support those multi-generational homes. But to your other point, how do we keep seniors in place, right? The best place for a senior to thrive and do well is in their own home, right? So part of my plan would be to, freeze taxes for a couple of years for everyone, because it's fair affordability for everyone who is currently struggling to make ends meet. I mean, our food bank use is through the roof, right? Everyone is using the food bank more and more. Every single month since the pandemic started, food bank use has gone up, right? So we need to help everyone in the city with their food insecurity, with their housing affordability. And so a tax freeze will help that. On top of that, we're also going to expand our program for seniors, for low-income seniors, move the qualification a bit to allow more seniors to qualify for their property tax rebate, so that we can help more seniors stay in place. And that'll keep them in their own homes where they can be the healthiest and where they can thrive.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. And I think about Mississauga and, I always think like you got to drive to get to places. So that number one piece about taking the transit is also really helpful, right? Like you don't have a barrier. Even having the new line go straight down Ontario. I mean, it's going to open up a lot of opportunity for folks.
It is. We absolutely needed a north-south connection. Yeah. But I'm presenting a grid that I want people to see. And we're going to show everyone that we can have nice things in the city of Mississauga.
We can or cannot?
We can.
Okay.
We're not just, Toronto's little brother or little sibling. We can have a nice, transit system as well that can move people around. So one of the things we're doing is we're creating what I would call a minimum viable grid for transit, for rapid transit across the city of Mississauga. So you use the Huron-Ontario LRT as the main example, but then look at our east-west lines as well, right? We've got a Dundas bus rapid transit system in the plan. That needs to be upgraded to an LRT as well. It needs to start Kipling. It needs to go through Huron-Ontario and keep going over the years. That would make up what I would say is sort of a 40-year mistake, where Hazel even admitted that we should have said yes to the subway back in the 80s that would take us from Kipling into the city center. We can do that with this government. This government's been talking a lot about how to improve transit and connections within Mississauga. They've recently announced that they'll fund the loop around the downtown and expand further into Brampton. That's great. There's a lot more that shows the need for that. Rapid transit in Mississauga already. Dundas is a perfect example of a line that needs to be upgraded from a BRT to an LRT. We need to have a BRT along Lakeshore with all the new housing that's going in there with Brightwater and Lakeview. There needs to be rapid transit there. Otherwise, the congestion is going to go through the roof. We need to give people who are going to become Mississaugans an option to not have a car. I'm not asking people to get out of their cars. What I'm saying is,
I hear you.
What I'm saying is, let's give them more option. Right. And people like to talk about, I have the freedom to drive. It's like, actually, I think it's the opposite. You're only able to drive. You have no other option because we don't have a minimum viable network that is, rapid transit around the city. Right. So we need something that goes across Derry as well, because that's our line that has received the most increase since COVID, right? It's well over 140% of the ridership from before. So we need rapid transit across there. And we can do it with bus lanes as well. We can do it with just having better service.
Just an interim.
Absolutely. We have a plan that we can do in the next year that would drastically increase service and response and reliability in terms of timing and making sure we get enough buses. Right now, people who are taking the bus, we have hundreds of trips that are full. And so they can't get picked up and they got to wait for the next bus, right? I missed the bus near my house and it's another 45 minutes before the next bus comes, right? Yeah. So how do we make sure the system's reliable? So we want to do this grid where we have, Derry, Dundas, Lakeshore, and then, Erin Mills and Winston Churchill, as well as Huron-Ontario, which we're already building, and then Dixie. So, we've talked to a lot of transit planners and say, this is how we give people more options. And this is how we move people around the city.
So what's the timeline for something like that? I mean, look at Toronto. We've got a few challenges with building subways and LRTs. So what can you learn from the city of Toronto and make it more efficient?
Well, we don't want what's happening in Eglinton to happen in Mississauga. And as it is, the Huron-Ontario LRT will be delayed a little bit.
Yeah.
Although I think it'll still get done before Eglinton does.
That's good.
But so what we have in terms of a plan is we have a short-term plan and a long-term plan. And the short-term plan are things that we know, and we've talked to staff about this, we've talked to transit planners about this, that we know we can do in the next 1 to 2 years.
Yeah.
Right. And that's things like bus lanes.
Yeah.
Right. You can do bus lanes with signs and paint.
Yeah.
Right. And you can do sort of the adjustments to certain intersections so that you get the bus leads that go first to help maintain the times. We can buy more buses. We can have a new bus depot. These are a lot of things that we can do in the next couple of years that would significantly increase the service for the city and the transit users in the city. The long-term plans, the additional lines for some of the things that we're talking about, that needs provincial funding and federal funding, right? And that's fine. We should have goals. We should look at what we're trying to build, but we also can do some of the work ahead of time. We can do some of the environmental assessments. We can talk about how much the project's going to cost, and then we can go to the other orders of government and lobby them to get this. But everyone needs Mississauga, right?
Yeah.
You forget that the federal government and the provincial government don't win governments without Mississauga.
Right.
So we should start throwing that weight around and saying, listen, this is a swing city. We're willing to work with conservatives. We're willing to work with liberals. We want you to do what's best for our city, right? And we need to start using that as leverage to do what's best for the city of Mississauga, and that's something I'm happy to fight for.
Well, okay, let me ask you a tough question. What sets you apart? Like, why you?
So while I was looking through a lot of our demographic data in the city of Mississauga, I actually realized that my wife and I are the exact median age of people who live in the city.
Okay.
Right?
You fit the stat.
We're perfectly in the middle,
Yeah.
right? We're perfectly in the middle in our 40s, where we have aging parents who are seniors, who have retired, who are now on a fixed income, who are very worried about affordability and how they're going to stay at home and age in place. We also have kids who are in grade school. They're in grade 4, 6, and 8 right now, who are quickly growing up and are part of, we're at the community center almost every night, either swimming or playing hockey or baseball. Like, they're everywhere. They're all over the place, right? And they're the future. And so I feel like we have this position where we can look to the past and see what can we build on top of the history of Mississauga that just hit its 50th anniversary. How do we build on this excellent base? And how do we take care of these people to make sure that they can continue to be part of our community, because they've provided so much value to this community and to this neighborhood and to our family? And then what can we do for these folks, these kids that are moving up in this generation right now who don't see a future for them in this city, right? And my experience in government and working with other orders of government and other levels to get what I think is best and what they think is best as partners, I think is what sets me apart. I've done a lot in a very short period of time. I want to tell people, give me a chance. Let me fight for you. Let me take us to the future and have that vision, have somebody with that vision and that energy to carry us forward. I'm not saying I'm going to be the next Hazel and I'm going to be around for the next 40 years, but I've got the time and energy right now to invest to make sure that we live in the best neighborhood and community possible.
I think leadership matters, and I appreciate that. And I think about where Mississauga, like how important Mississauga is as a part of the greater GTA and as a part of Ontario. And there have been 2 great mayors that were there. So there's big shoes to fill, for sure. And this is a question that all Mississaugans are thinking about. And, I'll ask you a tough question in the sense of, people might say, well, here were like 2 former mayors who had a lot of experience, and you might not have enough experience. So, why, in terms of a lot of things that you've said, you've shown that you have really been active and you've got a way to think about it. What would you say to those people who say those things?
I mean, I think it's that lived experience you have with growing in this city, with growing up in this city and raising a family in this city and having that perspective of, I'm really invested in what happens in the future here. Right? I've also proved that we can get things done.
Yeah.
Right? I've gotten funding from both levels of government. I've gotten our council together, mostly behind building more housing. But we need leadership. We need leadership in the city, and we need someone who's invested in what happens in the future of the city, right? And, I think I'm a reasonably affable guy who can work with other people. And I think I've proven that I can do that, right? And with the way things are right now, I want to, lower the temperature and tell people that we can work together.
Yeah.
Because we can find common ground on so many things, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what your political stripe is. People know we need to build more housing.
Absolutely.
Doesn't matter what your political stripe is. People know that, affordability is in a crisis right now. So if we all take responsibility about that in terms of what we can do ourselves in each level of government, then we can get there, right? It doesn't have to be, slinging mud all the time.
No, it doesn't have to be that way.
There's a lot of people in politics who have a history of, saying controversial things or throwing things on the ground, whatever it is, right? It's. I think people are ready for sort of a new sort of maturity around that space. I really just want to help people. Yeah. How do we do that together, right?
I mean, it's so honest and it's so refreshing, right? Like you don't have to always have a big fight. It's like, let's have a conversation. How do we get it done? I mean, I do believe it's really remarkable that in your tenure as councillor, like you've actually hit so many milestones and big things that impact not just your community, but all of Mississauga, right? Like the free fare is something that having a grid that of like, here's our vision, here's our short term, here's what we can do to relieve some of the pressures, but while we move towards something that's more sustainable, like, or faster or whatever, right? But it takes time. Everything takes time. I think that's the one thing when people are like, why isn't this done? We live in a TikTok world where people expect things to happen when, snap, the next shot's going to be like, we have all the subways or LRTs done. But the reality is having good people in place makes a difference to say, wait, I got to hold you accountable. Like, remember we talked about doing this? We still need to stay on track.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I think it's important that we have someone who intends to be here for a while, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to, slag any of my competitors or my colleagues, but, thinking about an interim mayor or, a placeholder, I don't think Mississauga needs that. I think Mississauga needs somebody who's invested in the future and is going to be here to implement the plan over the next 10, 15, 20 years, because we've got a lot riding on what happens in the next couple of years, right? As you said, we've had two amazing mayors for the last 45 years. There aren't a lot of opportunities for people to make decisions around who's going to lead this city, right? Sure, we have elections every 4 years, but generally speaking, once we get one of these new folks in, that's what we're going to get for the next little while. At least in Mississauga, it's been like that.
One thing I actually think that is so great about Mississauga is I think that they're very thoughtful electorate, because when they vote someone in, they're like, yeah, we're putting everything here and investing in it. And that's why there's been the sustained leadership to actually get a lot of things done. And even, why Hazel decided not to do the subway was also based on a principle of, do we need it? Do we want to be, paying for something where there might not have been as much density at that point? But now Mississauga is busting at the seams.
Well, and that's the amazing opportunity that I think Mississauga has. I like talking about how, we can have nice things as well, but we can be a leader for the rest of the country, right? In the sense that we're the 7th largest city in Canada. We're the 3rd largest city in Ontario. We have the 2nd largest economy in Ontario, right? We have a net import of jobs into the city of Mississauga, which most people don't realize. They think, it's a commuter town. Yeah, it's a commuter town for people coming in. Right, because we have so many jobs. It's a weird way
of thinking about Mississauga now. I also think about whenever you arrive into Toronto Pearson International Airport.
You're actually landing in Mississauga.
Do you know what I mean? How cool is that, right? And I think Mississauga is such a great city. I've moved a lot of people out there, and honestly, what you were talking about, like how let's try not have to have a car makes a big difference. Like this downtown is so vibrant. You can walk everywhere.
Downtown is great. Cooksville at Highway 5 and 10 is fantastic. You look at Port Credit. Port Credit's a jewel that most people don't realize. I represent Clarkson. Clarkson's got a nice little village. It's cute. You also have the Malton Village and Streetsville. And these are some very historic areas that a lot of people don't realize are there. But there's also a need for more growth in those areas, right? You talk to the business owners and they say, we actually do need more people. We need to intensify in these areas, right? So if
there's room for growth,
there's room for growth in the right places. And if you think we're investing billions of dollars in some of these places with new transit lines, that's where the growth should happen, right? You look at Cooksville GO Station, and you're going to have 3 transit lines with Milton two-way all-day GO, and the LRT and the BRT on here, Ontario and Dundas. This is one of the most interconnected places we have. Yet we have some councillors and some candidates who are saying we should cap the heights and we should cap the density in this area. And I'm like, this is actually a huge opportunity for us to make another city center, right?
Yeah, that's actually really forward thinking in terms of growth, right?
Yeah, and that's what we want to do. We want to have transit.
Quo.
Yeah, we want transit-oriented growth, and we can do that in Port Credit as well with the LRT and with the Lakeshore line, which is the busiest line that we have on the GO system is along Lakeshore.
I mean, I'll tell you, I have clients who are like, it has to be along the Lakeshore line. Like that is the criteria. When I'm like, oh, where do we want to be? It's got to be like 10 minutes within the Lakeshore line and Port Credit, which is further out. Like if there could be more growth there, I think it would just like flourish.
Yeah.
So there are 2 things. Usually I like to end with like a quote. What's your favorite quote? And it could change, but what's your, guiding principle or something like that. But before I get to that, one of the things I admire about you is your resilience. You have a young family. You have 3 kids, right? And even leading up to you becoming councillor, you're a parent, but you also invest a lot in community. So tell me a little bit about what sustains you, like the resilience, the persistence, like the tenacity.
Since I was young, I always looked at challenges and problems. And even when I talk to Rebecca about this, when we're, speaking at night after we've gotten home from a tough day at work, she'll always say, this happened in the hospital. My wife's a nurse, has 6 kids, and she'll talk about, these people came in, this was the challenges we had. And then I'm always jumping to the next step. I'm like, okay, so what's the policy that allows that to happen? How do we change this so that, those people get to the right place? Okay, what's the funding formula right now that is, disincentivizing the right treatments in the right places? She's like, Alvin, I just want to complain a little bit. I don't need you to fix the problem. But I've always looked at, problems that we have in society as challenges for us to fix, right? And I'm not just looking to solve every problem, but, it's easy to complain about things and sort of dismiss it and say that I can't do anything about it or it's too big for me to handle. When you work in government, when you spend enough time here, when you work with other people who want to fix things and make change, you realize what is possible if you get the right people in place with the right motivations and with the right ideas, right? And it's all about bringing people together and finding what those right ideas are. And that's actually leading into the quote that I'm going to give you, which is never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world, because in fact, it's the only thing that ever has. So when people come up to me and say, we have a huge homeless crisis right now, what can we do? I'm like, well, I can tell you what you can do. You can bring people together. We can try to solve the systemic problems, but we also have to solve and get them housed and fed right now, right? Let's do both. So let's come together and make a plan and have a meeting and figure out what to do next, right? And you want to tell me that, post-secondary institutions are underfunded or we don't have enough bike lanes or whatever it is, well, then let's sit down and come up with a plan and figure out how to do that, right? It's on you. It's on all of us to motivate people, to understand what the challenges are and to present solutions to those challenges. Right. And that's what I've always been excited to do is to tackle those challenges and figure out how do we solve them.
I think it's spot on. I mean, it's the community, it's the people. I think COVID isolated so many people that people were so used to like, I'm just going to Facebook like this or I'm going to do this. And that was their sense of advocacy and community. But then it gets super siloed. And what we actually need to do, and this is why I want to put a spotlight on people who are running and leadership, is it takes a community, right, to build up and to change things. So I really appreciate it. I have a great amount of respect for all the work that you do and just getting up every day to doing it, considering that you're balanced sandwich generation, balancing aging parents, young kids, and then also working for the public. So thank you.
No, thank you, Lee. Thank you for having this conversation with me. I'm always happy to talk about it.
It's awesome. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good luck. If you like the content on Tea with Lee, where we get in focus about things that matter, make sure you like, share, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next episode of Tea with Lee, where we get in focus.